Chapter 85, The Door of the Sixth Sense. Jackson. As soon as Ingrid woke up, he called for Jackson. What is it? The door of the sixth sense, does it instinctively sense danger? That's where it begins. This was why Jackson had recklessly unleashed his killing intent before. It stemmed from a survival instinct. The primal urge to live, shared by all living beings. If that was the starting point, this must be it. The tingling sensation brushing against his heart, subtle yet distinct. It was fleeting and faint, yet unmistakable. Still, it wasn't something that could be etched into his body in just one attempt. He lacked the talent for that. But Ingrid did not waste time lamenting his shortcomings. Reaffirming his lack of talent wouldn't change anything, so he simply moved forward once more. Rising to his feet, he embraced the start of another day. It was time to keep moving. Let's go. Taking on the same request, he grabbed a torch and headed to the cobbler's shop. This was his fourth visit. This time, he arrived before the first hammer strike had even fallen. Let's break through this together. What? Break through what? Ignoring the cobbler's confusion, Ingrid joined forces with him to carve a hole into the ground. Thus, he found himself once again facing the 6 branching paths. At the first and second passages, the tingling sensation returned, a feeling of foreboding that couldn't be ignored. Ingrid couldn't help but smile. So, this is it. This place where he'd entered out of a simple inability to stand by and let the cobbler die. A place he would have sealed off after a few unsuccessful attempts if not for the spell traps lurking within. But Ingrid had no intention of being trapped by this today. This was merely an accident, and accidents could be avoided with determination. He could easily drive the cobbler and his daughter out by force and call for a military unit to investigate the hole. Of course, that was the last resort. Entering blindly would guarantee death because of the spell traps. Even if he wasn't the one dying, Ingrid couldn't simply stand by and let others perish. However, calling for a mage, someone worth their weight in gold, wasn't an option either. No mage would respond to a mere squad leader's request, and who would even believe his claim of spell traps? Perhaps my squad or company commander would believe me, he thought. Regardless, this was his conclusion. This place was perfect for honing the door of the sixth sense. Realizing this sent a thrill through him. It had taken only 4 attempts to create a crack in the gate. Now, all that remained was to pry it open. So he stepped into the third passage. At that moment, a searing pain shot through him. An invisible blade seemed to slice vertically through his body from above. It was excruciating, unbearable pain, the sound of whistling wind, a chilling sensation spreading through his body, and blood gushing onto the ground as all his energy drained away. Every part of it was agony. And yet, the traces of newfound experience dulled the torment. This is why the repetition of today was not entirely dreadful. He was merely struggling and pushing forward for the sake of tomorrow. On the 5th morning, Ingrid resolved not to settle for the present. He set his goal. To open the door of the sixth sense and make it through this tunnel. Anyone who knew would call this madness. But to Ingrid, it was simply another moment of training. To move forward. To grow. This was something different from merely struggling for tomorrow. Why are you smiling about a hole beneath my shop? The cobbler asked, confused by Ingrid's grin. I enjoy exploring the unknown, Ingrid replied casually, brushing off the comment as he prepared to descend again. Be careful. I heard something moving down there, the cobbler warned, grabbing his arm. Sure, I'll be careful. Ingrid had many things he wanted to test. He descended, facing the passage once more. This time, his sixth sense didn't immediately scream danger. It's as if the gate is partially open, he surmised. From here, he intended to open it completely. Throwing himself blindly into traps had proven ineffective. He had learned that much. This was his 5th attempt. Even if he couldn't finish it here, he would continue to struggle. He refused to waste this moment simply because it could be repeated. Not even for a second. So, what was left to do? Ingrid spent the entire day walking the passage slowly, deliberately. From the first to the second entrance, from the second to the 6th. Back and forth, over and over again, until all 5 of his torches had burned out. Even as the day stretched on, nearing its end, he persisted. What exactly are you doing? The cobbler, initially bewildered, eventually offered him lunch. At least eat something while you're at it. Even the cobbler's daughter came to express her curiosity. Why is he pacing back and forth like a duck in a stream? By evening, the herbalist from a neighboring shop had joined them to watch. It seemed like a pointless exercise. But Incrid focused all his attention on finding even the smallest anomaly. How did the sixth sense detect danger? According to Jackson, it relied on the instinctive processing of sights, sounds, smells, and sensations. The sixth sense identified danger before the conscious mind could. He worked tirelessly to pinpoint that sense of unease. Despite his efforts, nothing happened. Then a thought occurred to him. What happens if I don't die and today ends? It was a curious realization. After countless circuits through the passages, Incrid hadn't gained any answers. The tunnel was about 1.5 times his height and extended far underground. He hadn't ventured deep enough to know how far it stretched. The walls and ceiling, though dusty, were sturdy. It felt humid, but there was airflow, and even with a torch, the depths remained shrouded in darkness. What else? The air carried a faint metallic scent, though not overpowering. Was there an undead creature lurking? A priest might have been able to sense it, but Incrid, who had devoted his life solely to the sword, lacked such talents. He continued his search, endlessly observing until a sense of discomfort arose. By the time night had fallen, he had found nothing. Aren't you heading back? The cobbler's voice called from the slope of the passageway. Turning around, Incrid saw his face peeking down from the incline. Climbing up, he responded. I'm not sure what's inside, but it doesn't look dangerous at the moment. Let's block the entrance and wait until tomorrow. I'll bring reinforcements. Wouldn't it have been better to call for reinforcements instead of lingering around? That would have been the right thing to say, normally. But if reinforcements are called and someone enters the tunnel to cause an explosion, wouldn't that be the end of it? It would be a path to death for all of them. I have something to check. Pretending to be an expert, as if accustomed to this kind of situation, the cobbler nodded, though with suspicion. Once again, they blocked the hole and headed back to camp. The moon was visible above. It was a full moon. The weather, which had warmed a bit during the day, turned chilly again as night fell. Incrid, tightening his monster leather coat, glanced behind him. It seemed the cobbler had not managed to break through the floor and go down. He appeared to be quite curious. If he had, there would have been an explosion. This raised another question. What happens when the night passes like this? It wasn't even something that could be considered an additional task. Today, repeating as usual, there would eventually come a moment when it would have to end. I should have tested it earlier. But up until now, the environment hadn't been right for testing. It had been the battlefield where death was a constant threat. The day was spent avoiding assassins' daggers. When encountering such days, it might feel dull, but Incrid remained indifferent. He had trained the same way every time, repeating the same patterns. It wasn't any different from today. You should be off to hunt monsters, right? But instead, did you go to kill Boots? Did you kill them? When he entered the lodging, REM asked. She seemed to already know where he had gone for some mission. Shaking off the dust from his pants, Incrid replied. I killed about 3. It was a fulfilling day. Let's stop talking. REM wisely avoided starting an argument he knew he would lose. If he had tried, Incrid would have easily won with his sharp tongue. Though he worried that someone might try to kill him to repeat the day, nothing happened, and he slept peacefully. The next morning, when Incrid opened his eyes and observed the situation, he muttered to himself. It's repeating. It was the same as the day before. Waking up or dying, perhaps it was all the same. Thus, today began again. Incrid wandered again in front of the fork in the road. Though there was no pain of death today, he was still consistent. He still did his best and still fought desperately. Being bound to today was the worst possible scenario for Incrid. So how could he break free from this? He knew even without the ferryman telling him. It must be about getting past this place. As the torch went out, the surroundings seemed dark due to becoming accustomed to the light. Clink! Incrid struck a flint to light the torch again and held it. He gazed at the 6 forks in the road. In this case, one of these 6 must be real, right? The easiest way would be to throw himself into each one and check individually. Instead of doing that, Incrid sought to sharpen his 6th sense. And it worked to some extent. Ominous. Something was stirring his survival instincts. It was faintly felt on the 6th repeated day. Thus, Ingrid passed another day that felt much like the others. "What have you been doing all day?" To calm the confused cobbler, Ingrid used the excuse he had thought up for today. "I'm checking to see what's inside. It looks like there's a trap. It seems like the Thieves Guild secretly made a hidden passage, so don't go inside." There were other Thieves Guilds in the city, not just the Thief Guild of Gilpin, but Ingrid still used that as a reference. He had named them. It was a plausible excuse. After walking back and forth in front of the tunnel, it wasn't that he had deeply agonized over it, but the result was this. The cobbler nodded. "Got it." Back at the lodging, Ingrid felt Jackson's glare. He had to sense the killing intent emanating from him. It was something that repeated every evening. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he endured, but Ingrid wasn't planning on sleeping. What would happen if the day repeated while staying up all night? He was curious. So, he endured and watched as the dawn came the next day. "Naya." Esther approached and lightly tapped his back with her foot. It seemed like she was protesting him not sleeping. "Go ahead and sleep first." Ingrid patted Esther's head as he spoke. Then he waited for the dawn to come. Ingrid blinked for a moment. Then, he saw the Black River. Meaningless. The ferryman was nowhere to be seen, but his words lingered. When he opened his eyes again. "What are you doing?" Though his head felt heavy and his body tired, it was the same repeated day once more. "What if I don't blink at all? Then, would the day just continue?" But how could a person endure without blinking? Even if one became a knight, it would be impossible. Therefore, today's repetition was unavoidable. Is this just living for today? That could work. After all, Ingrid already knew how to move forward into tomorrow. He once again headed toward the cobbler's shop. Enduring today more tired than before, it wasn't such a hard task. After all, he had fought and ran for days, enduring much worse. Thus, he continued repeating today, over and over again. Since there was no pain of death, was it peaceful? Was he getting drunk on peace, settling into today? No, Ingrid didn't do that. He didn't change. So, he repeated today, then again, and again, and again, for 78 repetitions of today. After living a day that passed the same every time. Back at the lodging, Ingrid avoided the killing intent shot by Saxon. 2 steps to the side. It was a trick he could do by sensing the opponent's killing intent carefully. It might have been a coincidence, so Jackson shot the killing intent again. It was a localized threat, expressing his intent to kill if Ingrid crossed a certain line. Ingrid avoided the killing intent as he turned his body. He wouldn't have been able to do it without opening the door to his sixth sense. And he didn't just open it slightly, he had to fully open it to do what he did. What is this? The efficiency of survival instincts is amazing. The answer he gave inwardly was different from the words he spoke out loud. Suddenly, it works. Of course, what he said outwardly wasn't the truth. What he said inwardly was the truth. A trap leading to death. There was no better training tool than that. Ingrid had savored it, chewed it, and enjoyed it. That had unlocked his sixth sense. And now, he could make Jackson's eyes widen like this. Suddenly. Could this really happen? No, but it did happen right in front of him. Jackson was stunned, but he didn't show it outwardly. He just nodded. What else could he do? It was done, after all. He had been wondering how to provoke progress, and now it was all useless. I owe you one. Ingrid said, and Jackson felt a little pleased. Of course, he quickly muttered inwardly as usual. What's the point of this? Despite thinking that, Jackson felt somewhat satisfied again. Regardless of the process, Ingrid had opened the door as he wanted. Jackson's lips curled up for a moment before they returned to their usual state. That was his way of showing joy. Chapter 86, What changes when you open the door? The door of the sixth sense. It was opened by sensing what could harm the body, but it turned out to be a sort of antenna that detected movements within a certain radius around the user. Upon opening it instinctively, it became clear what it was. If I use it differently, would it be possible to read the movements of the person behind me? Ingrid visualized REM's movements in his mind. Picking his nose, flicking it away, squirming inside the warm leather, then raising his head. His gaze stopped on Ingrid's back. Explaining the process in detail would mean he heard sounds, guessed their source, and predicted the person's actions, but the entire sequence happened instantly. This was the door of sixth sense, and what could be achieved by opening it. If this is the case, dodging someone swinging a club from behind wouldn't be too difficult. It was the realm of intuition, instinct, and the subconscious. Finally, Ingrid understood the instinctual hunting method Jackson had mentioned. The door of sixth sense condensed all surrounding information and delivered it directly into the mind. Thus, through focused application, he could even sense REM picking his nose behind him. Idiots call this a mind's eye, but it's all nonsense. It's just sharper instincts, nothing more. Or so Jackson explained. Naturally, the more it was applied, the wider its range of use became. However, there was something to be cautious about. Trusting your instincts too much can lead to being tricked. Be careful. As he spoke, Jackson placed his left hand on Ingrid's shoulder. Just before Jackson's hand touched, Ingrid had a momentary illusion that he was aiming for his neck instead. A strange deception. In some ways, it was similar to the Valen-style mercenary swordsmanship. Even after opening the door of intuition, what had changed in reliving today over and over? Nothing. Ingrid began living the same day again. The only difference now was a premonition that today's outcome would not be the same as before. In truth, it wasn't just a premonition. He now had the confidence to overcome that fiendish trap. Donning a leather cuirass, a longsword at his left waist, and a thick guard sword strapped to his back, he armed himself. Throwing in a pouch filled with small throwing daggers, 2 knives hidden in his boots, and layering a gambeson over it all, he had the full gear of a light infantryman. The process of arming didn't waste time, he was already accustomed to it. He had quickly devoured his breakfast just for this, and now moved with purpose. If I grab a few more rods on the way. It was a path he had walked dozens of times. Even stopping by a general store on the way was a routine so familiar it had grown tiresome. Are you planning to threaten the cobbler with a sword to coax him? Or fight for your boots and your life? REM's voice came from the bed, his face poking out as he lazily chattered. I won't return until I've chopped up 10 pairs of boots. It was the same joke they exchanged every day. Even though I keep repeating today, the jokes seem oddly consistent. It hinted at REM's feelings. The cobbler's shop itself seemed to irritate him more than any looming danger. Just deal with it quickly and let's go chop off some monster's head, REM muttered, snorting. Nodding, Ingrid thought to himself. No one would expect such a den beneath the craftsman's shop. It was only natural. I didn't believe it myself until I saw it. So, he couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond it. With a quick gesture, Ingrid tapped Esther's nose as a farewell, earning a surprised leap backward and a fierce growl that soon dissolved into something adorably ferocious. With a chuckle, he said, I'm off. Stopping by the general store, he purchased 3 rods. 2 were tucked into his waist, and 1 was held like a club as he walked briskly. Finally arriving at the craftsman's shop, he stepped inside. Look here. There's a hole, exclaimed the startled craftsman. Yes, I see it. I'll check it out, Ingrid replied calmly. The craftsman, who had been speaking with wide eyes, looked Ingrid up and down, now struck by his imposing appearance. Are you heading off to war? Even patrol guards didn't arm themselves this thoroughly. With thick layers of armor and weapons, the craftsman couldn't help but blurt out his thoughts. Always give your best, even in small matters. That's what my sword instructor used to say. It wasn't entirely a lie, an instructor he'd passed by once had said something similar. But in reality, he was simply preparing for whatever might come. There's a deadly trap set up. Don't go inside, even by accident. A glance into the hole, combined with a warning, made the craftsman pale with fear. But how could you know just by glancing at it? Perhaps I rushed too much, Ingrid thought. I specialize in this kind of thing, he replied casually. The craftsman reluctantly nodded, then finally responded with the reaction Ingrid had anticipated. A trap? What kind of trap? Why is this under my shop? Ingrid couldn't answer that yet, but he would soon. Because now he intended to find out. The trap had been laid, and it had fulfilled its purpose. What was certain was that if there was a trap, there was something to be hidden. Why they went to such lengths to set this up? Pausing for a moment, Ingrid took a deep breath before continuing. I'll find out now. Curiosity welled within him as he deftly descended the slope. The layout of the tunnels was etched into his memory as if he could see them with his eyes closed. He had wandered through this narrow maze repeatedly while training his intuition. Every contour of the ground was familiar. Once again, he faced the 6 branching paths. The first and second tunnels led to explosions. The third unleashed vertical blades of wind. There was no need to waste more time honing his senses. He'd done enough. Now then. Among the 6 paths, where was the safe route? Instead of answering the question he repeated in his mind, Ingrid found himself wanting to crack open the head of the one who had designed this place. Devious. All 6 paths were traps. If his instincts were not failing him, that was the truth. Having lived through dozens of these same days, Ingrid had naturally tested his instincts as well. He had to confirm whether his sense of danger was accurate. And indeed, it was. Ingrid learned that even the 6th path was wrong. Entering the 6th passage unleashed a hazy smoke from above. The moment it touched the skin, blisters erupted. Breathing it in delivered a pain far surpassing the sting of swords or the thrust of spears. It was a toxic mist of excruciating agony. Every single path emanated a sense of foreboding. There was no way forward, they were all blocked. Should he stop here? Was he trapped? Was there nothing more he could do? He instinctively knew the answer. To move beyond this cave was the only way to escape today. Stopping here, with the paths blocked, meant being trapped in this endless cycle. His opponent wasn't a skilled soldier adept at thrusting. It wasn't a silent assassin creeping in the dark. Nor was it a hostile army encountered on an unfavorable battlefield. It was merely a trap. A stationary, mindless spell trap devoid of reason or will. Ingrid stepped before the first passage. One wrong move, and I'm roasted. Spell traps, how did they activate? Having opened the door to his intuition, he could perceive them from the realm of instinct. There was no need for a torch. Ingrid took a step into the passage. Sweat dripped down his forehead with every step he took. It felt as though he were threading his way through razor-sharp blades that could cut him with the slightest touch. The activation mechanism of the trap was detection. He moved, avoiding the areas that triggered a sense of foreboding. Channeling a point of focus and letting the courage of the beast fill his heart, his steps remained steady. By opening the door of his intuition and focusing, he navigated the gaps in the spell traps. To anyone watching, his steps would seem like a zigzagging walk, but to Ingrid, it felt like traversing a tightrope. Yet, even so, he thought it was manageable. Instinct and intuition guided him. How many people could overcome such traps with sheer instinct? The sense of accomplishment filled his chest, though he knew now wasn't the time to indulge in such feelings. First one's done. He lit a torch and peered into the darkness ahead. The foreboding sensation from earlier had vanished, but there was still something ahead. He could feel it in his gut. Walking cautiously forward, he soon saw the creature waiting for him. Grurk. It had a hunchback, with sharp bone-like spikes protruding where its spine should be. Even in the flickering torchlight, its pale blue skin stood out. Its jaw was several times larger than a human's, drooling thick saliva as if savoring its prey in advance. Its nails were long, its forearms thick, and its eyes pitch black. Between its cracked skin, strands of muscle gleamed faintly. Its stoop posture caused its fists to drag along the ground. A ghoul. In this world, there existed beasts and monsters. According to theologians, they were born from the deaths of gods who once killed one another in ancient times. That wasn't something Ingrid cared about. What mattered was that such creatures existed. If it resembled a beast, it was called a demonic beast. Everything else was labeled a monster. Among them, ghouls were cannibalistic monsters that fed on humans. Why the hell are you popping out here? Could it be considered undead? The craftsman's prediction was half right. There was indeed a monster below, though it wasn't a skeletal soldier but a ghoul. Monsters had no intelligence for conversation. They only lunged at prey. Grah! Ghouls fed on humans. Their flattened noses, appearing more like holes stuck to their faces, were highly sensitive to the scent of humans. Smelling prey, the creature charged. The cave wasn't so narrow as to restrict movement, but there wasn't enough space to dodge freely or swing a sword wildly. However, there was still room to adapt. Shing! Clang! As the ghoul lunged, Ingrid unsheathed his long sword, angling it diagonally in front of him. 3. Behind the first ghoul were 2 more. Generally, taking down a single ghoul required 2 or 3 spearmen. An experienced soldier might manage alone, but strategically, it was better not to attempt it. Of course, if it came down to it, punching the Ghoul in the face would be the last resort. Just as Incrid was doing now. Thwack! Angling his blade forward, he drove it into the first Ghoul's chest. Gripping the sword with only his left hand, he pressed it diagonally downward, forcing the creature to its knees with a guttural scream no human vocal cords could replicate. Even so, the blade didn't cleave through completely, and his left arm bore the strain of the effort. With one Ghoul subdued, the second swiped its claws, but Incrid had anticipated it. Pivoting on his left foot, he twisted his body to evade and delivered a crushing punch with his free right hand. Crack! The punch landed squarely, snapping the creature's head back and momentarily disorienting it. While the third Ghoul stretched its unnaturally long arms toward him, Incrid sidestepped the swipe with a mere tilt of his head. Having created an opening, there was only one thing left to do. One at a time. It was a simple matter of killing them. Had this been in the past, truly the past, before he began repeating today, he would have been dead already. But now, his body, armed with experience, swordsmanship, and martial arts, had reached a whole new level. Gripping the sword with both hands, he brought it down with all his strength. Squelch! Grgh! The blade tore through one Ghoul, splitting it from chest to groin as violet entrails spilled out. The fallen torch illuminated the remaining two creatures, their shadows stretching long behind them. Unfazed by fear, the monsters charged again. Having already dispatched one with ease, Incrid's sword danced once more. He sidestepped the second Ghoul, delivering a horizontal slash to decapitate it, and tripped the final one with a sweeping kick before stomping down hard on its head. Thud! The skull didn't quite burst like a pumpkin, but grkk, rrrk. Black fluid oozed from the cracked head. Now I'm really curious. Muttering to himself, Incrid drove his sword vertically into the last Ghoul's head. Crunch! The blade pierced through the skull and lodged into the ground. Incrid twisted it to ensure the creature was thoroughly dispatched before withdrawing it. 3 Ghouls. A battle that would normally require at least 6 lower-ranked soldiers was easily won by Incrid alone. Even though a Ghoul's claws were laced with poison, not a scratch touched him. It was a testament to his training and progress. Though it was a shame no one was there to witness it, he figured the hidden foe within this cave would soon see the cruelty of his blade. Ha! After steadying his breath, he wiped the Ghoul's black fluid from his sword using a scrap of linen. Then, with no hesitation, he stepped further into the cave. Beyond this place lay tomorrow. Chapter 87, The Law of Killing the Ones Who Must Die. It's about reading your opponent and responding accordingly. While taking hits from REM. While learning about instincts from Jackson. While straining his body through Odin's isolation technique. And even while earnestly learning swordsmanship from Ragnar. Though progress was another matter entirely, his diligence remained unwavering. Don't you feel frustrated? Ragnar often asked Incrid that question. Frustrated? He had no reason to be. Ragnar's teachings were not just about mastering the basics but also about showing the way forward, a guidepost. How long had he wandered, clueless and lost? Now, with every step he took, new paths became visible, and it brought him nothing but joy. How should one respond to a descending sword? What should one do if the opponent is a beast? What about an ambush from behind with a spear? How should one extend their sword in different situations? Once the basics are mastered, the next step is learning how to apply them. No one can prepare for every situation. It's all about grasping the essence, the technique. Of course, it was far from easy. I thought this would be over quickly, Ragnar had said. But there was no chance of that. Incrid knew his talent was subpar. If his abilities had been average, would he have struggled so much? Probably not. Still, he bore no resentment. Instead of wasting time complaining, he would swing his sword one more time. The application of swordsmanship only holds meaning when you can read your opponent's moves and respond. Whether the opponent was a beast, a monster, or an enemy soldier, one simply had to observe their movements, discern truth from deception, and then slash or stab them with the sword. Ragnar never tired of teaching. And though Incrid was equally tireless, his progress was excruciatingly slow. He knew he was slow and lacking. He also knew he had to work several times harder than others. Thus, he turned everything around him, every situation, every environment, and even fleeting moments, into tools for growth. And so, Ingrid pressed on. Digging deeper into the cave, they pressed forward. For wolf-like beasts leapt out. Growl. They barked like dogs and charged without giving a moment's respite. The dynamic movement of the wolves, kicking up dirt as they dashed forward, would send shivers down anyone's spine. Their savage eyes radiated ferocity, and their tongues hung out between jaws dripping with saliva. Their yellow teeth glinted red in the torchlight. Heart of the beast. This bravery, born from his training, allowed him to face down even imminent danger without flinching. Even now, Ingrid remained calm. In the span of a few breaths, the wolves had already closed the distance. He combined the instinct of his swordsmanship with his innate reflexes. His reactions, derived from his courage, were almost reflexive. He believed even this would serve as a foundation for growth, using it as part of his training. There's no better practice than real combat. The only downside was that it always came at the risk of death. But wasting today was unacceptable. If he had desired a mundane life of tilling fields and praying for blessings, he would never have dared to dream. He cherished each day, even as he risked his life to move forward. This was the only path Ingrid had to sing his dreams. He wasn't throwing himself into death but rather staking his life to survive. Trusting his instincts. Following his reflexes. Snap! The sound of the wolf's jaws snapping shut echoed inches away. Ingrid dodged the beast's bite by stepping back with his left foot, then swung his elbow to bring his sword crashing down from above. Thwack! Thud! Instead of the blade, the flat of the sword struck the wolf's skull, sending it sprawling to the ground. Taking a step to the left, Ingrid positioned himself so the torchlight illuminated the area. One of the wolves lunged with its forelegs, narrowly missing his abdomen. The force of the blow would have shredded his gambeson into tatters. The beasts resembled monstrous predators with animalistic traits. Two of the wolves cunningly circled around to attack his rear. Thinking they had found an opening, they bared their knife-like teeth, sharper and denser than ordinary wolves, aiming for Ingrid's thighs. Whoosh! A sharp whistle filled the dimly lit cave as Ingrid spun and threw his hand forward. A throwing dagger pierced the forehead of one of the wolves with a dull thud, its speed blindingly fast. The other lunged simultaneously, but Ingrid avoided its teeth by pulling back his thigh and struck its head with a rising knee, combining evasion with attack. Thud! The wolf, though stunned, didn't retreat. Instead, it pressed its muscular forelegs toward Ingrid's foot. Ingrid stepped back, avoiding the claws aimed at his foot, and positioned himself between the two remaining wolves. He was surrounded. Despite the dire situation, Ingrid's gaze wasn't fixed solely on the wolves. Focus. And more focus. He no longer experienced the slowed perception of time. Nor did the surroundings dissolve into lines and points. However, the wolves' movements were vividly clear to his eyes. Ingrid could predict their next actions as if they were already drawn in his mind. With their movements visible, his response became straightforward. No need for feints or elaborate strategies. He let his sword hang loosely and swung it in a wide arc. The cave was too narrow for horizontal strikes but tall enough for a vertical sweep in a semicircular motion. The long sword, designed to crush in a single strike, did its job. Slash! Crack! The wolf on the receiving end of the blade was cleaved from chest to jaw, while the second one had its head shattered by the descending blow. If his timing had been off, he would have been mauled by at least one of them. This strike was sheer force turned into a spectacle. Phew! Ingrid exhaled the breath he had been holding, calming his pounding heart. One wolf remained. The lone survivor hesitated, giving Ingrid the chance to dart forward. Curiously, he ran not straight at the wolf but to its left. The wolf, seemingly oblivious, turned toward the same direction. Pivot on the left foot. In a state of heightened focus, guided by instinct and accumulated experience, he followed through. Pivoting on his left foot, Ingrid thrust his sword forward. The blade plunged into the wolf's gaping maw, piercing through its head and emerging from the back of its skull. Squish! The wolf's weight bore down on his arms as he withdrew the blade, letting the lifeless body drop to the ground. He stepped on the wolf's head to free his sword, blood dripping onto the cave floor as the beast's corpse quivered in its final moments. The last wolf's life ebbed away with a whimper. Lowering his arms, Ingrid reflected on what he had just done. I can see. The wolf beast's movements were simple, instinctual, driven by primal urges. This simplicity resonated with Ingrid's sixth sense, combining pinpoint focus with an innate intuition. It resulted in a series of strikes that leaned entirely on these instincts and sensations. I can do this. Right now, he felt he could demonstrate the adaptive swordsmanship Ragnar had spoken of. Reading the opponent's intent and movements was the key. What remained was merely to bring down his sword, trained through countless fundamentals. Deception followed a similar principle. It's something you already know. You're just in the process of formalizing it and ingraining it into your body, Ragnar's words echoed in his mind. Yes, he had done this before. But there was a stark difference between doing something unknowingly and doing it with conscious understanding, like the difference between a house cat and a tiger. Clenching and unclenching his fist, Ingrid revisited those words repeatedly. Even as he held the torch and moved forward, his mind was constantly painting an image of his sword. Mastering it in one attempt was a privilege of the gifted. For him, contemplation and repetition were the paths forward. To Ingrid, every moment became an opportunity for training. No more monsters or beasts appeared in his path. Instead, he found a passage connected to the sewers at the corridor's end. It was here that something beyond swordsmanship came into view. Whoever did this, they're insane. Digging such a tunnel, it was incomprehensible. Spell traps were expensive, far from being mere cheap rodent snares. Yet someone had set them across all 6 branching paths, blocking every route. Even the wealthiest merchants in Krona wouldn't engage in such extravagance. And with ghouls, beasts, and man-eating monstrosities stationed here, the question loomed, what were they guarding so desperately? The answer began to surface. You're out of your mind. Ingrid muttered as he reached a sewage pathway reeking of foul odors. By the torchlight, he saw what looked like laundry strung across the space. But it wasn't clothes. These were body parts, human entrails, flesh, and bones, arranged in grotesque displays. Even Ingrid, who had seen his share of horrors, felt bile rise in his throat at this abomination. This bastard, he must die. This wasn't just an act of madness. It was something no knight could overlook. Dreams didn't make someone a knight. But neither could a knight ignore such atrocities. Amid the carnage, there were intact human bodies, though lifeless. One of them seemed alive, blinking, and attempting to speak. K-R-R-K. It couldn't form words, unsurprising since it was nothing but a head. The sight of it blinking and moving its lips was grotesque in itself. K-R-R-K. K-R-R-K. What was it trying to say? Ingrid couldn't even guess. If it were him in such a state, he'd likely beg for death. He couldn't fathom how it was functioning, nor did he want to. The threads piercing through the skull weren't something he wanted to understand. Even with all he had endured, this horror was revolting. What the hell are you? A voice interrupted his thoughts. Ingrid turned toward its source, a man at the end of the passage, amidst the morbid decorations of human corpses. It was a pale young man with long hair draped in a dull green robe. This place, it's your handiwork, isn't it? Ingrid asked. The man seemed to ponder for a moment before speaking, his words mingling with muttered musings. How did you get here? Is it divine providence? A god must love me, delivering a test subject straight to my door. Let's see. You're from the standing army, aren't you? A well-trained body. Excellent. Oh, yes. Perfect. The young man's voice was light and cheerful. He sounded like a blacksmith admiring fine steel or a merchant celebrating a lucrative deal. At the same time, he resembled a pure-hearted youth confessing his feelings. The juxtaposition was unsettling. What should I turn you into? Raising his torch high, Ingrid glimpsed a shadow behind the man. A grotesque figure stitched together from various body parts leaned against the wall, motionless with its eyes closed. Beautiful, isn't it? That's my masterpiece in progress. Its name is Vermillo. Ingrid reached a conclusion. No more words were necessary. This lunatic. He hurled the torch at the man. The torch spun through the air, its fiery trail arcing toward the madman's head. Thud. With a simple gesture, the man deflected the torch. He's a mage. But that didn't change anything. A man who deserved to die must die. Even after seeing the torch flung away with a wave of the hand, Ingrid didn't stop. He charged forward, lowering his body to the grimy sewer floor and propelling himself closer. Splashing through filth, he reached the mage in a flash. Using his momentum, he swung his sword upward in a diagonal slash, cutting through the darkness left by the extinguished torch. Esther usually stayed close at night, but on days when Ingrid was in the city, she often lingered nearby. Of course, there were days she didn't. It's enough to stick close at night. She didn't need to be with him all the time. On what would have been an uneventful day in the barracks, something changed. "Stay safe," she said, watching Ingrid leave. But then, in a moment of carelessness, he flicked her nose with his finger. "This bastard. See you later." And with that, he was gone. Curious about what he was up to, Esther decided to follow him. Her silent pursuit was born of simple curiosity, sparked by Ingrid's unpredictable nature. Blending into the shadows of the alleys, the Black Panther moved nimbly, unseen by others. She followed him underground, drawn by the strange magical scent emanating from his destination. The deeper she went, the more she realized something was amiss. If she didn't intervene, the man she had chosen might die. That would be troublesome. For now, she decided to observe. When she saw Ingrid fighting Gowls, she thought to herself, as he improved. Though she wasn't versed in swordsmanship, she had watched him every day and could tell he has grown. But when he fought the wolf beast, something unusual caught her attention. What's this? Ingrid's movements were almost otherworldly. Even in the heat of battle, he emerged unscathed, his armor bearing only superficial scratches. Is the beast just incompetent? No, that didn't seem to be the case. And yet, Ingrid pressed on, eventually reaching the site of the grotesque carnage. Esther wasn't shocked, she'd seen her share of insane mags before. Still, the sight of Ingrid confronting a mage made her pause. Should I help? Expending even the meager power she had regained would delay her return to her true form. For now, she chose to wait and watch as Ingrid engaged the madman. But as the fight unfolded, she found herself captivated by him, her sharp eyes hidden in the shadows of the darkened sewers. Ingrid, the man who never ceased to surprise her? Chapter 88, Bonehead. He planned to finish it in a single strike, having already closed the distance. Ingrid raised his sword, but something struck his face before he could swing. It was a heavy blow, akin to being punched by REM. Ingrid fell backward, landing on his rear, and immediately felt another weighty impact on his head. Reflexively, he tucked his chin and rolled to the side. Thud. Once again, an invisible force, an intangible shockwave, struck where he had been a moment before. The area was free of filthy sewage, but the damp earth splattered onto his face. Ingrid squinted with one eye, his gaze darting around. It's invisible, he thought. It had to be magic, a reasonable conclusion given what he saw, a disembodied head with a moving mouth. Who else could pull off something like that? You dodged. Great, now you'll just make things harder for yourself. Stay still, and it won't hurt as much, the male mage said, waving his hand. Without being able to see it, Ingrid had no way to block the attack. He rolled to the side again. A sharp blade of wind sliced through where he had just been standing. Of course, Ingrid didn't know what it was. He only knew it was some kind of spell. What do I do now? Ingrid recalled the countless swordsmanship instructors he had encountered, who all had the same advice about dealing with mags. Mags? There's only one way to handle them. Run. Don't look back, just run. Don't fight them. Unless you want to spend your life barely alive, suffering endlessly. If you're lucky, you'll die. If you're unlucky, don't even imagine it. Even renowned names among his teachers warned him of the dangers of mags and their spells. However, his chaotic squad mates had a different perspective. Shoot them with an arrow, said REM. Kill them when they're not looking, said Jackson. If you must fight, getting close, was Odin's advice. And Ragnar? Killing them is the same, just cut them down. In the end, the consensus was clear, avoid mags whenever possible. But if you had to kill one, Ragnar's advice was the most straightforward. They die when you cut them. So that's what he would do. Running away wasn't an option. If he left the mage alive, the same thing would happen repeatedly. People would be torn apart like old rags and left strewn about like broken cloth. He thought of the cobbler and his daughter. If the mage was left unchecked, they would be the first to die. The cobbler and his daughter. For days, Ingrid had observed them from afar. Even without direct interaction, they prepared meals for him and left behind their worries, despite having no idea about his struggles. No, they wouldn't understand. But that didn't matter. Even if no one else understood, there were things worth protecting. That was Incrid's dream, the path he chose, and the destination marked by his internal compass. Now, don't run. Be good, it'll be fine, the mage said, snapping his fingers. A bright light flared above the sewer, far brighter than a torch. The illumination cast shadows across the damp floor. The mage showed neither a smile nor anger. To him, this was just work. Watching the mage, Incrid honed his focus, throwing open the gates of his sixth sense. The mage paid no attention to Incrid's movements. To him, Incrid was merely an experiment or a bug, a hunk of meat. That's all the mage saw. As the mage moved his hand again, an invisible shockwave blasted toward Incrid. Boom! Luck seems to be on your side, the mage thought, seeing Incrid dodge the spell with a quick sidestep. In reality, Incrid was relying on a strange sense to guide his movements. It's invisible. Just because it couldn't be seen didn't mean it wasn't there. A small realization struck him. If it couldn't be seen, could it still be felt? Combining his focus with his sixth sense, he sought to predict the mage's next move, just as he had once done with wolf beasts. This time, he watched the necrophile mage gestures, predicting his next action, trying to feel something, anything. The mage shaped wind into blades, sending them flying in 3 curved trajectories. The blades were sharper than a reaper's scythe, capable of slicing through even his reinforced cloth armor like paper. But Incrid rolled to the side, avoiding them. Dodged again. The mage muttered, continuing to wave his hands. Invisible shockwaves and blades of wind rained down on Incrid, but he avoided them all. It wasn't luck. It was a sense beyond his 5 senses, a sixth sense. His half-lidded eyes, twitching ears, and goosebump-covered skin combined to detect the mage's tricks. All the while, he searched for a way to kill his opponent. A simpler option might have been to throw a dagger and end it. But his instincts warned against it. No, that won't work. His sixth sense told him the dagger wouldn't kill the mage. What, then, was the best option? While he wasn't sure if this was natural, his instincts guided him through the mage spells. The mage antics, though magical, weren't fundamentally different from arrows or blades. If they were like the blunt weapons or swords of enemy soldiers, are they truly dangerous? Not really. He could avoid them. Even Mitch Hurrier's sword was sharper. So he evaded them. If a dagger wouldn't work, it was time to recall Audin's advice. Getting close. Dodging, he pushed off the ground in a single, explosive move. He saw the mage's eyes widen in shock. You little. The mage was startled as Incrid closed the distance in a few swift steps, avoiding invisible spells while raising his sword. The soldier's blade was now within a threatening range. This was Incrid's range, a swordsman's range. Whoosh! As the longsword descended toward the mage's head, the mage shouted in panic. Devour! Powerful mana and the mage chant combined, manifesting into the world. The spell should have carved out a portion of Incrid's innards. It wasn't something instinct alone could dodge. Yet nothing happened. Well, not quite nothing. Ooh! The mage staggered, confused. The spell, instead of hitting Incrid, rebounded, striking the caster. Through the torn cloth of his armor, the mage glimpsed black leather underneath. A faint magical aura radiated from it. What are you wearing? Something good. Incrid replied, noticing the mage's eyes fixed on his armor, which had seemingly nullified the spell. Incrid was quick to pick up on things, and even quicker to act. Swish! The sword cleaved through the air. The forged weapon, tempered by fire and hammer, descended mercilessly. Crunch, crack! The blade severed and crushed the mage's head. Despite resistance mid-swing, Incrid overpowered it with brute strength. As death overtook him, the mage lamented his fate in silence. There's still so much I've prepared. Vermillo! Vermillo! The magician even tried to wake the creation he named Vermillo. Of course, all attempts failed. The dead can do nothing, not even magicians. A dead person's delusions cannot influence reality. You seem disappointed, Incrid remarked, kicking the dead magician's body. Afterward, Incrid stripped off his torn gambeson. It was so shredded that even using it as a rag would be pointless. He felt no satisfaction. There was barely any relief at having survived. A threat to his life? It had existed, but he had overcome it. The only feeling left was that he had done his duty. He had killed the one who needed to be killed. That was all. Before cleaning up. This magician wasn't one to go down without laying traps, Ingrid thought. He carefully searched the area, wary of triggering any hidden traps. Eventually, he found a thick brown book, a pouch containing 5 gold coins, a black wooden staff, a few blue and white stones, and a pair of brown gloves. Ingrid took everything worth taking. The rest? Unidentified herbs and suspicious items that gave him no inclination to touch them. As Ingrid cleaned and sheathed his sword, there was a loud clang as the blade broke in the middle. Damn it! A sigh escaped his lips. It wasn't due to careless use of the sword, but he had felt a peculiar resistance while cutting the magician. Could that have been the cause? He couldn't be sure. Regardless, it seemed he'd need to buy another sword using the magician's gold coins. Maybe I should try reforging it, he mused. The sword was made of Valaisan steel, so repairing it might restore its usability. With that thought, Ingrid turned and left. His abdomen throbbed from the impacts he'd taken, and his head pounded, but it wasn't unbearable. Not long after leaving, Ingrid returned. The light still on. The magical glow above remained unchanged. Squinting upward, he noticed a glowing stone floating mid-air. A floating magical artifact. It reeked of value. Well then. The stone was only about the size of a fist. With a quick jump, he caught it, and even in his hand, it continued to emit light. At least it would make a convenient torch. Ingrid resumed his trek back, his footsteps echoing softly. Much later, a lake panther, resembling a sleek black cat, descended to the ground. Did he evade the magic? Esther was astonished. She had never imagined encountering someone capable of such a feat. Of course, the opposing magician's skill had been lackluster, but still. She reminded herself, it's only natural I don't know everything. She had lived a secluded life, not one of worldly exploration. It made sense that somewhere, there would be someone with such unusual abilities. Regardless, a stroke of luck. Esther reveled in magical knowledge and exploration. Once, her curiosity about another magician's grimoire had even led her to steal some. Using her claws, she sifted through the magician's belongings but scoffed. Amateurish. To her, the items were unimpressive. The true treasure wasn't any of those things but rather the creation the magician had called Vermillo. A creature stitched together from beasts, monsters, and human remains, designed to bolster a magician's physical weaknesses. Such constructs were commonly referred to as flesh golems. Repulsive to most, but highly practical for a magician. Esther, summoning her remaining strength, etched a magical circle onto the golem's forehead with her claw. It was a ritual that connected her inner magical realm to another dimension, transporting the construct there. The magician had been a fool. Had he activated the golem earlier, Ingrid would have stood little chance. Of course, Esther wouldn't have allowed that to happen either. As the ritual completed, the golem began to crumble and vanish, its remains dissipating like dust. All that remained was the impression where it had Saturday. Panting heavily, Esther was utterly drained. She had used up the last of her mana. The only thought on her mind was to return to her lodging and rest. Still, she couldn't resist one final remark. She named it after the magician who created the golem, ensuring she would never forget his ineptitude. Bonehead. Of all the magic practitioners she had observed, he was the most idiotic. There was a magician in the city sewers. Yes. And you killed him? Yes, I did. Ingrid spoke matter-of-factly, and his platoon leader responded with equal indifference. After stepping away to confirm the report, the platoon leader left Ingrid to clean up and check his equipment. He had considered assisting with a beast extermination task, but with his sword broken, finding a replacement became his priority. What happened to you? I.M. asked when Ingrid returned to their lodging. I fought a war with a pair of boots. A war? Were they ego boots? Did they put up a good fight? The term ego boots was a playful jab at the legendary ego swords, which were said to think and act independently. Not just I.M. but others in the room stared at Ingrid, curious about what had happened. I'll file my report and return, he said, avoiding further questions. Where's Esther? He asked before leaving. Audin, lounging in a corner, replied, she often goes out, but she'll return by evening. Don't worry. It was a reassurance. Esther was clever, too clever to fall victim to trouble. Upon returning to the captain's office, Ingrid saluted when his superior entered. Everything was there: spell traps and the dead magician. I see. He was a potential threat beneath the city. Understood. Good work. As the platoon leader joked, Ingrid gave a formal salute, pressing down on his sword hilt and bowing. Back at the lodging, he explained the situation to his squadmates, who were shocked. A magician? In the sewers? And you just cut him down? Impressive work, brother. Why the magician had been there remained a mystery even to Ingrid. After resting for 2 days to recover, Ingrid attempted to have his sword repaired, only to receive complaints from the blacksmith. This is beyond repair. What did you do? Kill a magician? When Ingrid nodded, the blacksmith gave him a skeptical look. Even if that's true, do I look like someone who can forge weapons to counter magic? Ingrid shook his head, and the blacksmith continued, you shouldn't keep doing things like that. This sword is useless now. I can make you a new one, but it'll have to be standard steel, no Valersan metal available. It was disappointing news, as Valersan steel was rare and valuable. Too bad, but it's fine. Wait a few days. Someone I know might bring some Noir Mountain iron. It's pricey, though, better come prepared. The mention of Noir Mountain iron made Ingrid's mouth water. Stronger than regular iron, it was highly sought after for weapons, second only to Valersan steel. Leaving the blacksmith's shop, Ingrid was stopped by a familiar voice in the marketplace. Hey! Soldier! Chapter 89, No Time to Regret the Past. Formation, now! The commanding officer's shout echoed. The approaching threat was 8 wolf monsters. Monsters or beasts are always intimidating, especially in a city like Border Guard, which sees frequent traffic from merchants and nobles. Therefore, the surrounding monsters need to be dealt with swiftly. Why are they so active in winter? One of the soldiers muttered as he set his spear in position. To Ingrid, it sounded like an intentional remark meant to ease his nerves. Following orders, 20 soldiers formed a solid defense against the wolf monsters. Typically, monsters are faced in battles of one against many. The squad leader was the type to stick to basics. And Ingrid found that uncomfortable. This is the first time for something like this. It wasn't about the practice, it was the desire for real combat, the kind that made him want to charge out and draw his sword. The thrill of battle, the time spent organizing what was gained from bloodshed, the very moment of taking a step forward. Those were the things Ingrid yearned for. It wasn't about jabbing at the monster's hide with a spear. This didn't help. He was even starting to feel bored. Normally, seeing such monsters would have made his legs weak, but unlike usual, REM, who followed orders quietly, was giggling beside him. Your face looks like you're frustrated, REM said. Under normal circumstances, Ingrid would have been told to stab the monsters in the eyes, but his frustration made words slip out. Can you see that? Looks like the squad leader's turned into a rough stone now. REM giggled, adding something else. Did you not know that between being exceptional and being crazy is just a fine line? He didn't know. What would happen if he jumped right into the middle of the 8 wolves? With the assumption that REM would back him up. It would probably be much quicker than poking at them with 20 spears, one at a time. If this was the approach, how long would it take to clear the surrounding monsters and beasts? It would take a while, wouldn't it? It felt like wasting time. Having been trained on defense formation so thoroughly, Ingrid naturally carried out his soldier's duty in the formation, but the frustration remained. REM kept giggling beside him, and it felt as though he was pushing him. Why was he following along like this? Ingrid thrust his spear forward. The spear's tip, energized, grazed the wolf monster's front paw. Growling. Reacting to the pain, the wolf monster bared its fangs, and the squad leader, seeing this, aimed for its head, thrusting the spear deeply. But the cunning wolf monster dodged by retreating. That was enough. Ingrid allowed his thoughts to wander. Otherwise, he felt he couldn't suppress the urge to rush forward and draw his sword to cut it down. The image of the panther he had raised accidentally crossed his mind. Esther. After splitting the crazy mage head in the saw and returning, the lake panther had come back exhausted. It smelled foul, like it had eaten rats from the sewers. It had been so caught up in hunting the city rats, that it collapsed, lying on the ground, barely breathing. Seeing that, Ingrid had soaked dried meat in water and fed it to Esther. Esther gratefully accepted it. What kind of things was I doing? Clang! His wandering thoughts were interrupted. The wolf monsters had approached within range of his spear. Ingrid pushed aside the image of Esther and thrust the spear into the approaching wolf's head. Thud! The hide on its head tore, and blood splattered. Don't take my position. The commanding officer's voice rang out. The unit, maintaining distance while poking their spears at the approaching monsters, wasn't engaged in an easy battle. The wolves, having been stabbed a few times, withdrew. This was the right way to do it. It was the proper method. But Ingrid still felt frustrated. He saw the commanding officer leading the soldiers. The man looked physically fit, his appearance quite dignified. Was he from the 2nd or 3rd squad? With frustration building up inside, Ingrid played with his spear. He couldn't consider it refined skill. It was just stabbing and pulling, nothing more. It felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. The spear didn't feel comfortable in his hand. If he had used spears more often, he thought, he might have been worse with them than with a sword. Ragnar had once said, "Whether it's a sword or a spear, the weapon you use can make a difference in how it feels in your hand." Usually, knights are encouraged to wield a variety of weapons. So, he had learned the basics, but only the sword felt like it truly belonged in his hand. A sword. Purely a sword. It felt like meeting an old friend he had known for a long time the moment he gripped it. The joy, the excitement, the expectation, the warmth of the sharpened steel against his palm. Ah, I want to use a sword. He wanted to recall the experiences he gained in the wizard's lair. Not a spear, but a sword. I'll grant your wish. Rem muttered beside him. Ingrid looked toward him, but Rem was already charging forward. Looks like we're in for a long night. Rem shouted gleefully as he rushed forward. His voice was full of enthusiasm. With each step he took, the dirt beneath him flew up. His movements were dynamic, rougher than even the wolf monsters. Get back in formation, you crazy bastard! The commanding officer shouted in anger. The basic strategy was to defend the formation against the monsters. If the formation broke, it would endanger the lives of other soldiers. Rushing forward was wrong, and Ingrid knew it well. But why not just kill all the monsters? He couldn't hold it in. The desire to rush out and wield a sword, reliving the thrill of combat, was overpowering. Ingrid briefly closed his eyes. For a moment, he abandoned rational judgment and relied on his instincts. Following those instincts, Ingrid threw aside his spear and kicked off the ground, charging forward. No, what are you? The commanding officer's voice faded behind him. Rem's sudden action was something the commanding officer had anticipated. But Ingrid joining him was not. So, the commanding officer couldn't help but be startled. Having fun. Rem, noticing Ingrid following him, grinned and started swinging his 2 axes. The arcs of the 2 axes cut through the air, clearly aimed at slaughter. The first axe split the approaching wolf skull in half, and the second swung horizontally, severing the jaws of another wolf trying to bite at the arm of a soldier. The 2 axes were like the blades of a guillotine. A little. Ingrid had to admit it. He drew his sword, swinging it in a large horizontal arc. A wolf that had been charging at him halted, its front leg severed. Grr! The wolf let out a groan, sounding like a dog. Ingrid pulled the sword back in, swinging it vertically. The wolf's head was split open. Thud! He pulled the sword back, slamming it with his fist into the head of another wolf coming from the side. Thud! The wolf's head was knocked to the ground, rolling away. Only 8 monsters. Not sure when I started calling 8 monsters only 8, though. Ingrid didn't feel any real threat from their current enemies. Axes split heads, and swords cleaved through wolves. The arming sword in his hand, while not as satisfying to wield as a longsword, still served its purpose well enough. He regretted that Ragnar couldn't join him for this battle. Of the 8 beasts, 1 had fallen to the spears of the soldiers. 4 were felled by Rem's axe. The remaining 3 were split apart by Ingrid's sword. Their skill was truly remarkable, proof that their rank as elite soldiers was well earned. Damn, they're ridiculously good at this. One of the soldiers in the formation muttered in awe. The commanding officer should have reprimanded him for that. But instead, he thought to himself, I can't really blame him. They really were exceptionally skilled. In a fight against magical beasts, formations were essential for survival. But when extraordinary strength was at play, utilizing it became a mark of a good commander. Rather than scold them, he assessed the efficiency of the situation. This was a good outcome for both Incrid and REM. If he were to nitpick, their actions could technically be seen as insubordination. Above all, the squad leader held a high opinion of Incrid. He had seen him a few times before in passing, but back then, Incrid hadn't seemed noteworthy. When had he developed such incredible skill? Was it true, as the rumors claimed, that his abilities had skyrocketed overnight? There was no way to be sure of anything. What mattered were the results. His at least at high level, the squad leader thought. One could believe he was one of those frontier defenders, known as the Butchers of the Frontier. Those guys often dealt with magical beasts not by maintaining formations, but through sheer individual skill. You too. Rather than reprimand them, he reassigned their efforts. If you want to fight, there's a place where troublesome beasts have appeared. Go there. Understood. Standing amidst the corpses of the magical beasts, Incrid, the spellbreaker, nodded. His calm demeanor earned a few cheers from the nearby soldiers. After all, they had just wiped out a pack of beasts. With this, their unit's task was complete, and they could move on to assist other areas, perhaps even rest for a bit. No one truly enjoyed risking their life against magical beasts. It took someone either extraordinary or crazy. Perhaps both. We'll retreat to the city for resupply and rest, the commanding officer declared, leading his men away. Incrid glanced at REM, who was wiping beast blood off his axe with a smirk. You owe me for this? REM teased. Not at all. Though he said that, Incrid couldn't deny feeling some relief. Yet, a deeper hunger still burned within him. This isn't enough, he thought. A few wolf beasts couldn't sate his craving. He yearned for more than training. He needed the heat of real combat. The fire within him burned brighter. Let's go. They've given us another mission, Incrid said. As the soldiers headed back to base, a few approached Incrid, patting him on the chest. Thanks to you, we're off first. One of them, a familiar face, smiled as he handed Incrid a bundle wrapped in clean cloth. Try this. It's amazing, the soldier said before walking off. Others offered similar looks of approval. Skilled soldiers were always valued allies. Incrid, with his straightforward demeanor, was well liked. REM, however, was a different story. Most kept their distance from him. It wasn't just his barbarian origins, his rough demeanor and penchant for picking fights made him less approachable. We fought together, but the treatment's different. Feels like discrimination, REM grumbled. Call it karma, Incrid replied, tearing the jerky in half to share with him. Taking a bite, he was surprised. This is different, he thought. The jerky was delicious, soft, with a perfect balance of seasoning and a slightly sweet aftertaste. What's in this? Why is it so good? REM asked. No idea, but we'll have to ask for more later, Incrid replied. Curiosity aside, they prepared themselves. Incrid adjusted his gloves, thick leather pieces scavenged from a dead mage's belongings. The gloves, sturdy and layered, had proven their worth. They absorbed impact well, especially when striking wolves. No matter how unpleasant the mage's origins, the gear itself was reliable. Even his leather armor, reinforced with magic, had saved his life more than once. When Kraus had mentioned the equipment was exceptional, Incrid hadn't fully appreciated it. Now he did. With solid gear and newfound confidence, Incrid's resolve burned. Let's go. Following the commanding officer's orders, Incrid and REM headed south, taking half a day's journey to reach their next destination. Is this the place? Looks like it. Using a rough map, they found the location, which had been fortified with makeshift defenses. Such preparation signaled a serious engagement with magical creatures. Noise filled the air, and they soon spotted something flying overhead. Incrid murmured under his breath as they joined the battlefield, with REM hopping lightly to keep up. A shrill scream tore through the air, announcing the presence of a monstrous foe. Below, wounded soldiers writhed in agony, some missing eyes, others clawed and bleeding. My eyes! My eyes! Kill it! Kill it! Crossbowmen loosed bolts into the sky, but none hit their mark. The screeching creature was a harpy, its form grotesque. Its torso resembled a woman's, but its wings replaced arms, and its lower half was that of an eagle. Red feathers fluttered as it dove, its chest heaving in a way that felt more unsettling than alluring. The sight froze Incrid momentarily, dredging up old memories. There was a time when he'd been forced to retreat, leaving comrades behind to die. The harpy's appearance had signaled death and despair for his group. The memories stung, but Incrid didn't dwell on them. He had no time for regret. Instead, he tightened his grip on his sword and stepped forward, focusing his strength into each step. The sound of his blade being drawn rang out. In that moment, time seemed to slow, and his instincts traced the harpy's path through the air. The daring heart of the beast within him surged, empowering his every move. As the harpy descended, Incrid moved in sync, his blade arcing through the air toward his target. Chapter 90, It is correct. The 4th Platoon leader of the Heavy Infantry Company had recently been transferred to this unit from Central Command. This is a disaster. Having been newly assigned to the unit, he saw the monster-slaying mission as a good chance to adapt and undergo some real combat training. The scale of the mission was indeed substantial, eliminating a large pack of human-faced hounds. Still, it wasn't outside expectations. Heavy infantry wasn't called the backbone of border guard forces for nothing. But then, things took an unexpected turn. Harpies appeared. It was a frustrating development. Why harpies, all of a sudden? Support was called. The heavy infantry formed a defensive square. In the meantime, several soldiers supporting the unit died. The crossbows aimed at the sky only managed to hit empty air. Then, reinforcements arrived. 2 light infantry soldiers. That was it. You've got to be kidding me. What's worse, these 2 had the audacity to stride straight into the harpy's attack range. It was nothing short of suicidal. The platoon leader didn't know Incrid or REM. As a recent transfer, he was still acclimating to the unit's dynamics. Sure, he'd heard about the Spellbreaker and the Troublemakers squad, but he hadn't had time to process it. So, when he saw these 2 walking into danger during an already chaotic monster extermination, his immediate reaction was anger. Damn it! The curse slipped out naturally. While there was always some tension between heavy and light infantry, watching comrades die was never enjoyable, especially when it involved harpies ripping heads off bodies. The 2 light infantry soldiers were, of course, Incrid and REM. Their arrival alone was due to them not waiting for the rest of their unit to catch up. Thus, the archers requested as backup were still en route. Hey, fall back! The platoon leader's urgency cut his words short. He wanted to yell for them to retreat or duck. The heavy infantry could endure harpy claws and strikes thanks to their layered armor, thick gambeson, chainmail, and a thin iron breastplate topped off with steel gauntlets and greaves. Add a rectangular shield to that, and their defensive formation resembled an impenetrable fortress, aptly nicknamed the Turtle Heavy Infantry. It was a posture designed to hold out until reinforcements arrived. In contrast, the light infantry looked like easy prey to the harpies. And indeed, one harpy immediately spotted the newcomers and charged at terrifying speed. The platoon leader saw its crimson crest dive downward in an arc. Even if he wanted to help, there was nothing he could do. All he could do was brace himself to witness their deaths and vow revenge. The harpy's talons were about to shred one of the soldiers when... Shing! Slash! The sound of steel scraping and tearing flesh reached the commander's ears. He could only see the harpy's back. Harpies were about the size of an adult male, so the figure of the light infantryman who had done something to the creature was obscured. What the platoon leader did see was the harpy's wing being torn apart, its body crashing to the ground like a botched skipping stone, bouncing once in the air before rolling lifelessly across the dirt. The harpy, with its crimson crest and swaying breasts, was now soaked in blood, its body covered in a film of dust. Scree! The wounded creature let out an anguished cry, but the platoon leader couldn't even blink. What just happened? Who? In the incomprehensible situation, only a dumbfounded exclamation escaped his lips. As his eyes pieced the scene together, realization struck. A harpy dove in, and they cut it down with a sword. Was that even possible? It was a feat that defied reason. If the harpy's talons had veered slightly, if the timing had been off, if the strength behind the blade had faltered, everything could have gone wrong. Attempting such a maneuver was outright madness. Who could face a charging harpy head-on and emerge unscathed? Even among the frontier garrison so-called slaughterers, only a handful could pull off such a stunt. The sound of harpies screeching broke his thoughts. Luck. Pure luck. That's what he told himself. It wasn't just him, either. Two harpies gliding above also dove toward the pair, their talons tearing through the air with deadly speed. The platoon leader's eyes were locked on the two light infantrymen. The angle of the harpies' attacks differed this time, making their reactions clearly visible. However, their movements were beyond comprehension. The axe-wielding soldier dodged the oncoming talons by twisting his body and swung his weapon. The platoon leader could only register the motion, but in the blink of an eye, the harpy's head split vertically. The harpy, its head cleaved in two, crashed into the ground, its body bursting like a ripe tomato. Blood smeared the dirt, leaving a trail of gore and mangled feathers. Another harpy down. The other soldier, the one with the sword, repeated a similar feat. Having already torn through the first harpy's wing, he swung his blade once more. It was as if the harpy's trajectory had been predicted perfectly, the creature flying straight into the sword's path. Thud! This time, the blade struck the harpy's chest. While it didn't cleave the harpy in half, the sword buried itself between its grotesque breasts. The harpy tumbled to the ground, its internal organs ruptured and spilling out. It was as good as dead. The platoon leader involuntarily looked upward. 8 harpies remained. His unit hadn't managed to kill a single one, but these two had already taken out 3. Frontier defense. The platoon leader's misunderstanding deepened. Their skills were far too overwhelming to be ordinary soldiers. Was this what elite soldiers were capable of? He had heard rumors of the slaughterers of the frontier before transferring here. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. Before he could process further, a group approached from behind the duo, armed with throwing weapons like javelins, longbows, and crossbows. Their cloaks bore the emblem of an eagle on their epaulets. The frontier defense force was the real deal. The soldier leading them had already assessed the situation and seen everything with his own eyes. His skill. It had improved again, to the point where it was no longer certain he could be defeated easily. The one leading the defense force was Torres, a platoon leader in the frontier defense unit, with various ties to Incrid. Judging someone's skill by how they kill a monster was foolish. However, Torres knew he wouldn't be able to perform such feats against an oncoming harpy. Let alone do it twice in a row. Is it just luck? Torres shared the same thought as the heavy infantry platoon leader. At that moment, a third harpy dove in. Torres' gaze dropped from the harpy to the figure below. There stood Incrid, pulling his sword out of the chest of the harpy he had just killed. Hey! Torres shouted, a warning to look up. How should one describe this? Incrid connected the dots. He split time into fragments, wielding his sword as his instincts directed. The result? The first harpy lost its wing. Why you? REM whistled beside him, his grip still tingling from the sharp resistance of the harpy, whose heavy weight emphasized the impact. It wasn't difficult. Incrid picked up his sword again. As the next harpy swooped down, he slashed its chest dead center and released his grip on the sword. Holding on would have likely torn his hand apart. It was a precise judgment. A strike that connected the dots and delivered forceful impact. The result was another monster slain. As Incrid crouched and swung his sword downward, a harpy's talons barely missed his head. The sharp sound of air being split sent a chill down his spine, but it didn't feel dangerous. If you dodge, that's all there is to it. It was a simple attack pattern. Dodge, slash, and thrust, a practical application of swordsmanship. Standing atop the chest of the dead harpy, where the collarbone of a human would be, Incrid planted his foot and pulled his sword free. Cree! The creature's resilience was astounding. Despite its chest being half split and its innards spilling out, it blinked its eyes. Though Incrid was looking at the harpy he had just struck down, his senses were attuned to his surroundings, particularly the harpy descending from above. He didn't need to look, the air's ripples were enough. His perception was sharper than ever. Hey! The shout reached him, but he was already moving. Using the wing of the dying harpy, he stabbed it with his sword and heaved upward. Crunch! The strain pushed his arm muscles to their limits, with force running through his waist and thighs. The dying harpy was hurled upward, smashing into the oncoming one. Thud! The collision sent the attacking harpy tumbling. After using the harpy to block its kin, Incrid rolled to the side, dispersing the impact by redirecting the force. It was an intentional, calculated movement to minimize the residual shock on his body. He rose immediately after rolling, rushing toward the harpy on the ground. With a sharp downward strike, he split its head in two, as if splitting firewood. That made 4. REM had taken down 1, and Incrid 3. The first one to fall had already been finished off by a soldier who lodged a quarrel into its skull. The harpy flock fluttered their wings above and began to scatter. Harpies never fought losing battles. They fled. Incrid let his arms hang loosely, suppressing the lingering regret. Just a few more. He wanted to fight. He needed more experience, more time to refine what he had learned and absorbed. He needed to adapt and train further in real combat. Perhaps then, he could fully integrate what he had gained in the source. Enjoying yourself? REM chuckled beside him, clearly having already grasped Incrid's state of mind with his sharp instincts. Some might call it madness, but your skill has reached an extraordinary level. Still, it's curious, don't you think? I knew real combat would help, but to achieve this much in just one day. Though he didn't probe too deeply, his skepticism was evident. It was only natural. Leaping to this level of growth overnight was far from normal. Incrid offered his usual excuse. Just lucky, I guess. REM knew skill couldn't be built on luck alone, but he wasn't about to argue. What did it matter? Seeing this man so excited as he wielded his sword made it enjoyable for him too. Once, I barely survived being chased by harpies. Incrid muttered. Really? Yeah. There wasn't much emotion or significance behind his words, just a statement of fact. Incrid briefly recalled a fallen comrade from that time before brushing the memory aside. This isn't revenge, but at least killing this harpy flock brought him a measure of satisfaction, even if the lingering regret outweighed it. Both of you, your units, wait, hold on. The heavy infantry platoon leader, who had been holding their defensive formation, approached, looking incredulous. 4th Company, 4th Platoon, 4th Squad Leader Incrid answered with a salute. Squad Leader? Not part of the Frontier Defense Force. No, the Frontier Defense Force is over there. A familiar face, Torres, approached, raising a hand. Even so, his eyes remained fixed on Incrid, scanning him from head to toe. He seemed to want to ask what on earth Incrid had done to grow so much in skill. We were sent as reinforcements, Torres said, but we didn't even get to fire a single arrow. What was going on? Soon, the heavy infantry company's 4th platoon leader and Torres exchanged quick greetings and summarized the situation. While listening to their conversation, Incrid suddenly asked a question. It was an important issue for him. Is it over? What are you asking? The monster cleanup. I'm wondering if it's finished. What's with this guy? Why is he asking that? 2 light infantry soldiers had just killed 4 harpies and saved a heavy infantry platoon. It wasn't an extraordinary achievement, but it was commendable. Yet one of them was seriously asking if it was over, while the other, clearly a foreigner, was grinning beside him. What was with these lunatics? The platoon leader thought for a moment before replying. Our original target is the extermination of the man-faced hound packs, so no, it's not over. He hadn't forgotten the mission's purpose. A pack of man-faced hounds had been disrupting trade routes around the border guard, immobilizing merchant caravans. That's why they had been deployed. The pack hadn't yet appeared on the trade routes outside the city walls, but their presence in small numbers nearby made it clear that trouble was brewing. Their task was to clear out the monsters and beasts around the area to ensure the city's safety. I'd like to join. At Incrid's words, the platoon leader thought to himself. Does he just want to fight more? He looks like he's itching for a battle. Is there something wrong with my eyes? No, his eyes weren't wrong. His observation was absolutely correct.